Addiction and recovery is a process. So let's take a look at how this process develops. We are all born with certain genetic predispositions, whether it be hair color, eye color, diabetes, heart disease, or addiction. We are born with these dispositions. This is the nature side of things. So some people are born more likely to have or develop an addiction than others. And once we're born, we begin interacting with our environment. This is the nurture side of things. And this can be anything from environmental toxins to adverse childhood experiences to oppression and privilege. And these things determine whether or not our genes with their predispositions are activated or not. This is what we call epigenetics. And depending upon what we experience, we might either initiate use regardless of what our genetics might say. The genetics might determine what happens after the initial use or how quickly this initial use transforms into something else. This initiation of use can take many forms. For instance, a student might join a social group where substance use is a rite of passage, or an athlete might be prescribed opioids after a severe injury. Some may experiment for a while until a physiological dependence develops, while another's initial first use might activate that genetic disposition that quickly takes over a person's life. Regardless of how use begins, the consequences typically progress similarly. Even though some folks might be able to manage life pretty well with an addiction, this typically doesn't last forever, and consequences soon emerge. You've all probably heard of the phrase hitting rock bottom, and this is a common term used by people in recovery, and this represents the heightened consequences or fear of consequences that create this sense of complete anguish and despair. In short, a person has reached a point that they never ever want to go back to again and are willing to do whatever it takes never to be there again. But this only happens with the supports that are necessary to help that individual get there. The scope and severity of this bottom experience is different for everyone. Some people have what's been called a high bottom, where, it just might be the loss of a relationship, while others might have what's called a low bottom, where it might be a near-death experience. Either way, some have called this hitting bottom experience as pre-recovery. You might call it a fork in the road experience where with adequate supports and resources, people might choose one way or another. Much like there are many pathways to addiction, there are also many pathways to recovery. Some might initiate recovery due to the legal consequences of their use, while another might have a personal revelation, or it might be the concern of their family. While the desire to initiate recovery might be present, there still remains tremendous barriers to accessing treatment in a timely fashion. The reality is that privilege and recovery capital are strong predictors of sustained recovery, not because of willpower or anything like that, but just the sheer access to resources. For instance, accessing treatment following an arrest looks very different for a white middle class male than it does for a person of color living in poverty. Once initiated, recovery includes changes across a continuum, and these changes vary in scope, such as how many areas of life have to be changed, as well as depth, how much change in each area of life needs to happen. So, for instance, one person might have to relocate, cut ties with all their family members, and transfer schools, whereas another person might just need to find a recovery support network. Now, one person might need year-long rehabilitation program, while another might initiate and sustain recovery alone. With adequate recovery capital and support, people do sustain recovery. This is where the ongoing recovery supports are crucial. This is a major focus of the new recovery movement to enhance aftercare and ongoing recovery supports. And collegiate recovery programs, the Spartan Recovery Program plays an important role in helping folks transition from treatment back into higher education or transitioning from early recovery into sustained recovery and the next step of their life in an institution of higher education. Finally, I believe that the purpose of recovery is not just a cessation of use or continued abstinence. It's about an enhanced quality of life. Simply abstaining from alcohol or other drug use does not necessarily enhance quality of life. And quite frankly, early in recovery, quality of life might not increase. Withdrawal is not a fun experience. I believe that focusing on abstinence alone is short-sighted and potentially runs the risk of increasing the chances of a return to use. So abstinence is viewed as only one way to help students enhance their quality of life. This is the true goal, to help students be empowered to develop purpose, to be included, to have a community that supports their pursuit of sustained recovery and an enriched college experience for the hopes of enhancing their personal, professional, and academic goals and their contributions to the UNC Greensboro community as well as the community at large.